This is a preview of some content I'm working on for my course, Dotfiles from Start to Finish-ish. If you're not enrolled in the course and found your way here by another route, this is the kind of material you'll find in the course. I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll consider enrolling. I'm planning on adding 3 new videos at the end of the Git and Symlinks section, where you will learn a little bit about making pull requests on GitHub using the Web UI. In these lessons, I show you how to make a pull request, so you can add yourself to one of my repos. You'll be adding yourself to a class roster, and I wanted to have at least a handful of you in the repo before I cut the final version. This will make sense soon enough, so let's get right into it. I have 2 browser windows open. At the left is a regular Chrome window. At the right is another, but that is in incognito mode. This allows me to log in to 2 different Git accounts, which is a great way to learn how this all works. After you watch and follow along with these lessons, I recommend creating a second GitHub account so you can experiment with other options that we don't have time to get into. At the right is me, and at the left is another account called Dotfiles Student, which represents you. At the left, you only have one repository. It's your Dotfiles repository, so let's check that out. This repository is in the same state as if you were following along with the course and had just finished the Git and Symlinks section. At the left, we'll click into the README, and then let's head over to the right to see my account. Over here, I have a new repo, this Dotfiles Show and Tell one, so let's go into that. This repo is a place for students of the course Dotfiles from Start to Finish-ish, and others to share their repositories along with a bit more about themselves. Down here we have a message about getting involved with the community by adding a link to your Dotfiles repo to this repository, and about following a few other students as well. Then we have some instructions that are split into 3 parts. The first section is about adding yourself to this repository and creating a pull request. The process of creating that pull request will create a fork that you don't really need, so then we'll learn about deleting that and learn a few things along the way. And in the last section, you can accept a pull request from me and resolve a merge conflict. Let's go back up to the start of these instructions, and GitHub is nice enough to create these anchor links, so let's grab this one, and then you, over at the left, will open this in a new tab. Let's scroll up and look at the files in this repo. First, there is a contributing file. We'll take a look at this in a little bit. Then there's a license that we don't really need to look at. After that is the README and the roll call file. This is the one you're going to be adding yourself to. The first step down here in the instructions is to navigate to the roll call page. And before we do that, I should note that these instructions are almost final, but they might change just a touch before you actually see them. But let's continue with these instructions. You might want to crack this open in a new tab, but since we have another browser open at the right, we'll just click into these. Down here, there are 2 contributors. This is my EIEIO account and my personal account. And I hope it makes sense that I would like to fill this up with a handful of other contributors before releasing this content in the course. These lessons will make more sense with a longer list of students down here. The next step in the instructions is to click the pencil icon to fork this project and edit this file. If we hover over the pencil at the left, we see this tooltip show up that matches the text in that second step. But if we go over to the first tab, which is your own repository, and hover over the same icon, we see a shorter tooltip. This only says edit this file. This is because this is your repository, which you can edit directly. You don't need to create a fork first. In tab 2, you are visiting my repository, so you can't just edit this file directly. After you click this, you enter this editing mode, and at the top there's a little explanation of what just happened. Over at the right, if we go to the top, we see there is 1 fork of this repo, but if I hit refresh, now this updates to 2 because of the one you just created. If I click in to see the forks, I see the new one you just created. But I'll back out of here so we can see the instructions again. And if you navigate to your repositories by opening a new tab, you'll see that now you have 2 repositories, a second one, which is the fork that you just made. Let's click into this because I want to start drawing your attention to this information at the top left of each repo. This is your version of the repo, and you can see the difference in this information here at the top left. Keep an eye on this stuff throughout these lessons. Let's close this tab and return to the one that you are editing. Let's scroll down to the instructions again, and the next step is to add yourself to this list. So let's go over to the left, and we will grab this little markdown template. Now, if you look at the instructions at the top, it says go ahead to add yourself to the top of this list. So I will add a return down here and paste this in. I will change this to Dotfiles Student and pretend that's a first and last name. If you feel like staying anonymous, go ahead and put your username here. Now let's go back to the first tab over here, return to the home page of your repo, and grab the URL so we can return to the second tab and paste it in. Now just go ahead and add a brief introduction about yourself. One thing I failed to mention would be a link to your portfolio. That would be a good addition here. The next step is to preview your changes to make sure you like how it looks. So over at the left, right next to the Edit tab is a Preview Changes tab. Let's click that. These changes look just fine. Let me click this URL to make sure it goes to the right place. And yeah, that looks fine, so I'll close that. The next step is to add a message that says add and then your username. So over here, I'll type in add Dotfiles Student. The next step is to add a description, and if you'd like me to submit a pull request in your repository, this is where you'd request that. Down here in the third set of instructions is where we cover this material. But let's return to the instructions up here. Now at the left, you, the Dotfiles student, can add a message here asking me to send you a PR. And in this one, you will be asking me for some help with your backlink that links back to my course. If you didn't realize, this title and description is actually the same as a commit message that you've done over a handful of times now. So I'm going to add something else here that you don't have to add. I'm going to put in parentheses that this is the commit title. This will just help us see the difference in a few things that we do later. But again, there's no need for you to do this. You should learn it just fine by watching me do it. Okay, the next step over here is propose changes. So let's go ahead and do it. That puts us on a comparing changes page, and if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see our commit. We can click this to see the description of the commit. Let's scroll back up here, and the next step at the right is after comparing changes, click pull request. But before that, take a little time to try to understand these drop-downs here. At the top, we have the base repository, which is my repository. And at the bottom is the head repository. This is your fork, and in the process of creating this fork, it automatically created a branch called patch 1. And then we have this arrow icon, which just means that we're going to be taking your changes and putting them into my repository. Let's go ahead and click pull request. And now we see this little pop-up on the right, which happens to be the next step over here, which says before opening the pull request, review the contribution guidelines. We mentioned this before when we looked at the files in the repo, so let's open this in a new tab. Before collaborating with someone on GitHub, and that could be by creating an issue or a pull request, you should look for these guidelines first. Make sure you follow their rules so you're not wasting their time. Of course, the whole point of this repo is that you do create a pull request. So let's close this and then close this pop-up here. The next step is about possibly changing the title and description just to see the difference between the pull request message and the original commit message. I'll go ahead and add a note down here that this is the description for the pull request. And then up in the title, I'll change this from commit to PR. And again, this is not something you need to worry about. The next step is to actually create the pull request. The title of this page was comparing changes before, but after we clicked create pull request the first time, the title changed to open pull request. Down here, there's a drop down and you can create a draft pull request if you want, but we don't need to do that. So let's go ahead and click this. Now I'll pause here for a second just so we can see this yellow state that says checking for ability to merge. On a bigger project, there might be a lot of things that need to be checked before merging in someone else's code, but this is a really simple repository, so this thing just flashes by. Now at the top under the Pull Requests tab, it shows that there's one pull request in my repository. And if we scroll down here and expose the description for the commit, we can compare these with the title and description for the pull request. Now at the right, if I scroll up to the top and do a refresh, I can see the new pull request here as well. So I'll click into this tab and then into the actual pull request so we can see it from my perspective as well. At the bottom, we can see that I have the option to merge this code into my repository because I'm the owner. Your description for the pull request ended up as the first comment, so I will scroll down here and add a comment of my own. This comment is a bit contrived, but I'm sure you can imagine on a bigger project, the owner of the repo would take a pretty hard look at your code before merging it in. And because of that, you can also imagine a long chain of comments to figure out just how the code needs to work. Now I'll go back to tab 1, and we are done with this first set of instructions, so let's take a look at what we have up for the second set. The first step for the second section is to wait for me to merge your PR and then revisit the PR page. So let's head over to tab 2, where we still have the PR open, and you get to watch me do this from my perspective. So far, we've only looked at this from the conversation view, but there are a few other tabs here. Let's click on commits. We only have one commit here, but as you can imagine, a PR could have dozens of commits. We don't have any checks, so we won't worry about this, but this would be where you'd do things like test your code and such. Now I'll take a look under Files Changed, and I see your change right here. I can click these three dots and view the file, so I can check out your work before merging it in. I'll test your link by trying to open your repo in a new tab, and that works. Now, if I scroll down here, I see a backlink back to the course URL, which I really appreciate. Now I'll scroll up to the top and hit this Watch drop-down and change it so that I watch all the activity you make to your repo. Since you've requested a PR from me, I'll leave your repo open and head back to tab 2, where we are still testing out this file. I'll back out of here to the Files Changed tab, and let's click that I viewed this file, which closes it and shows that I viewed 1 out of 1 files. Again, if there were a couple dozen here, this could be helpful. Now I'll go back to the conversation view and scroll down here to look at this merge stuff. This merge button has a few options. If I click the drop-down, we see that it already has rebase and merge selected. That's what I chose for the last PR, and this remembers your selection, but the default here is this top option, create a merge commit. I'm going to keep rebase and merge selected, but in a few minutes we will have a chance to look at this top option. When we click this merge button, we are presented with what seems like a superfluous step. There are no other options to select here, so why is there a second button that we have to click? Well, if we had selected the option to create a merge commit, there would be some more information to fill out here, and again, we'll see that later. I'll go ahead and confirm this, and we see both perspectives update. You see that your pull request was successfully merged and closed, and then it gives you some suggestions for what to do with your branch and fork. At the right, if I scroll up to the top, it still shows one pull request, but if I hit refresh, it disappears. If I go into pull requests, it shows that I have 0 open pull requests, but I can go back and see the closed ones if I want, and here's yours. If I go to the home page for this repo and then into the roll call page, we can see that you are a new contributor, and I can click this and see a full list as well. And down here, we see that the change you made has successfully made its way into my repo. I'll close this tab now and return to the first tab where we see the instructions, and the next step for you is to delete your branch, but not to delete your fork, not yet at least. At the left, it tells you that you can delete this fork, which we will not do just yet. Rather, let's click this Delete Branch button. The next step for you is to navigate to the home of your fork. So if we scroll to the top, we can click the home page of this repository, but this is the home page of my repository, not your repository. If we go into roll call, we can see your change to my repository, But in order to see your fork, we can go to the drop-down up here and choose your repositories. And we can get to the homepage of your fork from here. Now this shows that your repo is one behind of my repo. So what does this mean? If we click into the roll call of your fork, we see that this does not have the change you just made. If you want that change to show up here, now you have to do another pull request, but do it from my repo to yours. Let's go back to the home of your fork, and remember, this is the home of your fork. Now let's click this pull request link and see what happens. This puts you back on my repository, which is the default for pull requests. The next step is to switch the base so we can pull things in the opposite direction. Back on the left, let's pay attention to a few things before we click this link. Keep an eye on the URL. Keep an eye on the username and repo title area. Also keep an eye on this base/head repository area. After clicking switch the base, all of this stuff switched around. We see that we are now on your fork of the repository. I've drawn your attention up here a few times before, and this is why. GitHub bounces you around as you do these things, so it's a good idea to keep your eye up here to try to figure out where you are and what's happening. Down here is the same change you made before, and again up here it's just things happening in the other direction. The next step is to create the pull request. Over here it says comparing changes at the top, and after we click this it changes to open a pull request, which we've seen before. Last time we saw a pop-up about contribution guidelines, but you don't see that because you don't have any contribution guidelines, and you probably wouldn't see them anyway because you are contributing to your own repository. The next step suggests that you might want to change the title and description just to see what it looks like. So to the title, let's add Deja Vu just so we can see a difference, and down in the description, I'll add a sentence that explains what's going on here. This is you requesting yourself to pull the change you just made into the fork you created in the first place. I know this can be confusing, but hopefully this is starting to make sense. This time around, there's no patch branch. It just goes from master to master. And another difference is that you have complete control over this one. You are creating the PR, and you will be able to merge it as well. The next step is to click Create the Pull Request again. So over here, let's do it. We see the check that makes sure it's able to merge. And then we see this bit about continuous integration, which again has to do with testing and that type of stuff, which we will not be getting into. The next step is to make sure we are using the Create Merge Commit under the Pull Request button. Last time you saw me do it with rebase and merge, but don't switch to that. Let's keep this first one selected to see the difference. Last time we saw what seemed like a superfluous step at this point, but this time it makes more sense. When we do it this way, there will be a separate commit message to go along with the merge, and we could change the title and the description if we want. And now that I see this, I realize I made a quick error here. At the top, it says commit title, and I should have changed that to PR title. So let me cancel this and see if I can fix it. If I scroll to the top, yes, I can change this title. So I'll change commit to PR, and actually I think I'd rather put Deja Vu here in the parentheses. When we save this change, we get a nice little entry down here in the conversation section. So let's try this again, and remember to keep Create a Merge Commit selected. The next step over here is actually the one we're working on about changing the description if you like. But let's leave this the same and click Confirm Merge. If we scroll to the top, we still see one pull request, but if we refresh, that will disappear because you just merged it in. The next step is to navigate to your fork's homepage, so let's do that over here. Here it says we are ahead of master, which we've seen before, but before we figure out why we are in this state, let's click into roll call again. Here we see the update we made before, so everything looks fine. And while we're here, let's go up to the top and watch this repo. As other students follow these instructions and add themselves to this list, you'll get updates. If you see a student that you'd like to follow, and for now the only example is me here, you can open their repo and watch their changes as well. But you don't really need to watch my changes, so let's close this and just keep an eye on this repo and follow some other classmates when they are added. This is why I'm making a preview of these lessons. I'd like this list to be a little longer before I send it out to everybody. I've been warning you to keep track of where you are, and I actually just made a mistake. I just told you to watch your own fork rather than the real repo, so make sure you click over to my version of this and watch for changes there. Remember, it can be pretty confusing bouncing around from repo to repo. Let's back out of here and figure out why we are ahead of master. Let's click into here and see what it would look like if we wanted to create another pull request. Again, we are ahead, and the only change is this merge commit, not the actual commit. This would not be very valuable information for you to ask me to add to my show and tell repo. And this is a good reason to use the rebase and merge options so you don't have these extra commits. The next step is to check out the commit history to get another perspective on this. Remember, by default, these pull requests are created on my repo, so you can't click here to go to your commit history. In fact, this is where you might want to hit that watch drop-down and choose to watch all activity, rather than making the mistake that I made earlier and watching your own fork. But since we can't click on this to return to the home of your fork, let's back out of here. Then let's navigate to the commit history where we see your original commit along with this possibly superfluous merge commit. Okay, since you've learned enough from your fork, the next step is to navigate to the settings and delete the repository. So we can get to settings, which are hidden under these three dots, and then let's fly down to the danger zone where we can delete the repo. You'll have to type or copy-paste in the name of the repo, and then you'll be able to delete it. Then I'll confirm my password, and the repository was successfully deleted. Now let's go back to our profile where we are back down to one repo. If you scroll down through your activity, you can find the PR you made earlier. Let's click into that. And then over on the right, since we are done with this second batch of instructions, let's scroll down and take a look at the third section. Before the instructions for this third section, there's a little note here saying that this part assumes you requested a PR. At the left, we see the pull request you made to add yourself to the repo, and in the message, you asked me to help you out with something on your repository. So step one here is to wait for me to create that PR. I still have your repo open over here in tab 2. Down here, you have this backlink to the course, and I'm going to help improve it a bit. Now I'll go into the README, and like you did before, I will fork your repository. At this point, if you go over to your repo, we can see that you have 0 forks, but after hitting refresh, now we see 1. But let's return to your pull request so we can keep an eye on it for a bit longer. Now over on the right, I will select this current backlink, and I'm just going to paste in something else. This just explains what a potential student will find in the course. And all of these keywords should help with the search engine rankings. I would really appreciate more backlinks so I can get a boost in the search engine rankings. I'm going to need plenty more students in order to keep adding lessons to the course. In addition to adjusting the backlink, I'm going to add another to-do down here. This line is important because you're about to make a similar change that will force us to look at a merge conflict. I'll check the preview to make sure everything looks fine, and then I will add a commit message down here under proposed changes. In this commit, we are improving the backlink with keywords and adding a to-do. And for the description, I will remind you to follow the instructions and give you a warning about a potential merge conflict. In the upcoming sections, you'll create branches for your code changes. This will make merging my pull request look a bit different than what we are about to do, but you should be able to figure it out. Over in the first tab, I will grab the anchor link to the third part of these instructions, and then I will paste that down here. Okay, I'll go ahead and propose these changes. Now we see under Comparing Changes a screen that we've seen before, but everything here is in the other direction. Now your repository is the base, and mine is the one with this patch branch. Down here we have the commit, and we can see the description. And everything down here looks fine, so let's go back up here and create the pull request. I think we've seen the difference between the commit and PR titles enough, so we will leave this title just as it is. But I am going to make a change to the description. At the left, we still have your original pull request open. I'm going to grab this URL. Back over on the right, I will paste in that URL, but I'm going to take advantage of Markdown, which was not available in the commit message. I'll say that this is my new pull request for the help that you requested in your earlier PR, which we see at the left. And then I'll paste in the link to that pull request. I'll click Preview where we see that GitHub is smart enough to figure out the pull request that we're talking about. Now I will click Create Pull Request, but keep an eye over on the left. There we see that because I added a link in my pull request to your pull request, we see an addition to the conversation at the bottom that links back to my pull request. Now I'll go back to tab 1 so we can see these instructions again. Since I've created a pull request in your Dotfiles repository, we can take a look at step 2, which is navigate to my pull request within your repo. There are at least a couple ways you could get there. You could go back to tab 1, then refresh the page, and we see now you have a new pull request. But since I referenced your original pull request in my new pull request, we can use this link down here at the bottom, which we will open in a new tab. The next step at the right is to open the Files Changes tab, review the changes, write a comment, and approve the changes. Let's go to the left and see what that all means. Under the Files Change tab, you probably want to click these 3 dots and view the file to make sure everything looks fine to you. I'll crack open these 2 links to make sure they work. The Twitter link works just fine, and of course this is a great place to stay in touch with me and to see updates for the course, so please come follow me. And the backlink, which redirects to the Udemy course, works just fine as well. Eventually, I'll create a website at that URL, which is why I'd like you to use it, but I'm too busy making lessons and haven't had the time to put that together. So for now, it just redirects to the course. I want to thank you for helping make this a bestseller in the first couple months since my collaboration with Fireship. Of course, I appreciate all of your reviews, but this one in particular is worth calling out. I couldn't write better marketing copy if I tried. Each review gives me a little boost of motivation, so please keep them coming. Since that link works, let's close that tab, and in the 3rd tab you are still viewing my changes. Let's investigate things here a bit more. Under this drop-down, we see a hash of my commit. We can see the description here, of course, and then let's take a look at this hash, which is also a link. Here we see a little warning saying this commit does not belong to any branch on your repository, and it may belong to a fork outside. At the top, we see we are on your account here. That's where I created the pull request. But this commit is kind of in a limbo state before you accept it. It's interesting to see how that works, but we can close this. Now, before I back out of here, let me warn you one more time about resolving a merge conflict. There's a good chance that you'll have progressed further in the course and will have created a branch by the time I make the PR. Merging this change into master and then resolving the conflict between branches will involve a few more steps. If that makes you nervous, you can hold off on doing this until you're more confident. Let's back out of here and return to the pull request, where we are still in the Files Changed tab. Now let's check that we viewed it, and this time let's see what's going on here under Review Changes. You are unlikely to review changes for a pull request that is this small, but let's give it a shot anyway. You can add a comment here. How about, thanks, but I think I'll share my repo with 1 billion people. Then you can select the Approve Radio button, but before you click Submit Review, over on the right, let's go back to tab 2 so we can watch the PR in real time. Now when you submit the review, we get a comment and a little more information about the changes being approved. Let's go back to the instructions, and the next step is to make sure you choose Rebase and Merge when you accept this pull request. So on the left, under the Merge Pull Request dropdown, instead of Create a Merge Commit, we will use the bottom one, Rebase and Merge. This will keep that extra merge commit out of your history. Now, since I can't get enough of watching this stuff in real time, over on the right, let's go back to tab 2 where the pull request is. Then on the left, let's click Rebase and Merge, and follow that up by clicking Confirm. Now on the right here, let's scroll up to the top and remind ourselves that the PR I just created lives on your repo. And then at the bottom, it gives me the option to delete the branch, which you did before, but this time I'll go ahead and click on Settings and go directly to deleting the fork. Keep an eye on the URL and we'll see that this will bounce us from your repo over to my repo where my version of the fork exists. So I'll go ahead and copy, then paste this so I can delete my fork of your repository. Okay, since I'm done with your fork, I can close this tab and return to the instructions. The next step is for you to navigate to the commit history just to see that there's no extra merge commit. Over on the left, we still see the PR that was just successfully merged in, so we can close this tab. Now let's return to tab 1 where your Dotfiles repository is still open. And after we hit refresh, we'll see this pull request disappear. You will have a new commit, and you will have a new contributor, me. When we scroll down, we see the new backlink, and the last to-do there is new as well. Now, if we click into the commit history, we see just the commit for this change, and we don't see that extra merge commit. And down here is a little note that teamwork makes the dream work. I was the author of this commit, and you added it. Next up in the instructions is a little change of scenery. You're going to go to your terminal app and make an intentional conflict with the to-do that I added. Actually, we will do all of these steps while we're in the terminal. We will try a push, then we will do a pull, we will resolve the conflict, and finally add, commit, and push our changes. Over in the terminal, we are in our .files directory. Let's do an ls to get the lay of the land. Everything here should look familiar to you. Earlier, I mentioned creating a second GitHub account, and you might even want to create a second user on your machine, which is what I've done for these lessons. The user, Dotfiles Student, isn't my daily driver account on this machine. Also, now that we're in the terminal, I should note that there are command line ways of doing much of what we have done here. Take a look at this Fireship video for a brief intro on this. But let's continue by taking a look at our README file with Nano. This is the current state of the code on your machine. Remember, I already made that change and you merged it, but that's on the remote repository. You still have the old backlink at the top, and that new to-do at the bottom has not been added. Let's say that because of your excitement, you forget that we added that to-do and you decide to add one of your own. You want to share this with 1 billion people, which will cause a conflict because the code in the remote repository only says 1 million people. Let's save this and then check the Git status. Of course, we have a modified file, which we've seen before. Now let's run a git diff, which shows us the change you just made. Let's add this change with a commit, and for the message, we'll say add to do to share with 1 billion. Next, let's try a git push, which gets rejected, and it gives us a little warning message about why. We have changes on our remote repository, which we have to bring over to our local version before we can push any of our local changes. This suggests a git pull, so let's try it. First, let's focus on the bottom of this output. Git tried to automatically merge the changes, but because it found a conflict, we have some manual work to do. As for the warning at the top of the output, some of this language should be familiar now. When accepting a pull request, we saw some options for how that code would be added to our repositories. Here we can see we could choose between a merge and a rebase as well. But we're not going to experiment with this anymore. But one interesting note to mention here is if you had a preference, you could add it to your git config file. Let's move on with another git status. This says that our local branch and our remote branch have diverged, and they each have one different commit in each. Then it says we have unmerged paths. Once we fix our conflict, all we have to do is do another commit, and then we'll be able to push. And here it says our README is modified, but it also says both, which we haven't seen before. Let's crack open our README again and see what it looks like. The first thing we see is that Git was smart enough to automatically merge in the change to our backlink at the top. But Git was not smart enough to automatically merge the change to the bottom of the to-do list. This looks scarier than it really is, so let's figure it out. Head basically means the latest state of your local code. And everything between these left angle brackets and these equal signs is the change to the code that we have locally. Then everything between the equal signs, the right angle brackets, and this long line of numbers and letters is the code on our remote repository. And what is this long string of letters and numbers? This is called a hash. Each commit in your Git repository has a unique identifier. Over here in the browser, we can see the first handful of numbers of the same hash. If we click into this commit, we can see the same full hash right here. Let's go back to the terminal where we still have the README open in Nano. And what do we need to do to fix this? As I said, it looks scarier than it really is. All we have to do is delete what we don't want. We can delete the changes that we have on the remote version, along with all of this surrounding stuff that was added by Git. And then we'll delete this line that has head and the angle brackets. And that's all you have to do. You could save this, add it, commit it, and push it. And with that, you would have resolved your merge conflict. But now that your confidence in using Git has grown so much, perhaps you want to change this to a trillion. Let's save this, and then we will add our change to the README file. Now let's take another look with Git status. This says that all conflicts have been fixed, but we are still merging. All we have to do is another git commit, and that will conclude our merge. Let's go ahead and do that with a message that says that we resolved the conflict, but we changed it to a trillion. Now let's see if we can push, and it looks like it worked. Let's go back to the browser where we still have the commit that was part of the pull request open here. This is the one that says million. And before we back out of here, just take note that it says this commit has one parent. Now let's back out of here, and then let's get a refresh. Now we have two more commits here, one that says billion, and the more recent one says trillion. Here's the commit you made locally by editing README in Nano. And note that this commit also says it has one parent. Finally, let's take a look at the last commit, the one in which we resolved the conflict. This one says it has two parents because it merged those paths together. And that's that. Let's go back to the home of your repo, where we see that your README has been updated with the improved backlink, along with your latest addition to the to-do list. Boy, do you have a lot of sharing to do. Thanks for watching this preview of these upcoming lessons. Once this roll call page fills out a bit more, I'll add a final version to the course. If you're not yet enrolled, please consider doing so. So far, there's over 5 hours of content, and I have plenty more to add. Keep rating, reviewing, sharing, liking, and creating those backlinks. Come find me on Twitter, subscribe here for more updates, and I'll see you next time.